Hi, I'm Jacob Shiba, and welcome to Programming Your Irrigation Timer. A little bit about me before we get started. I'm an associate professor of water technology at Palomar College in California, teaching a variety of classes in water technology, water distribution, and water conservation. Prior to being a full-time professor, I also worked as a community affairs specialist and water efficiency representative, planning various water education programs, outreach events, and rebate programs, all to promote water conservation. I have a BS and an MS in environmental sciences, and I've been a G3 certified professional since 2017, and I love working in my garden. Well, enough about me. Let's get started. Why are we focused on landscape so much? Well, when we look at the potential areas for water savings, we see that the biggest area of water use occurs outdoors in the landscaping, anywhere between 30 to 80%, or even higher than that, depending on where you live and how much water you use. So while it's important to upgrade to high efficiency toilets to fix our leaks, the biggest area of potential water savings is again in the landscape. And one way we can focus on those savings is, of course, how we irrigate our landscape. So learning how to properly program our irrigation controller can make a big difference when it comes to water savings and water conservation. So this is the puzzle that we're going to build throughout this webinar. There are going to be 6 basic components. We're first going to start with the basics of an irrigation system and irrigating in a landscape. Then we're going to talk about how you figure out what schedule you should use when watering your landscape. Then we're going to look specifically at how to program that schedule into a manual controller, both for one zone and multiple zones. Then we're going to take a special look at smart controllers, controllers that use weather to irrigate your landscape for you. And then lastly, we're going to finish off with some maintenance and troubleshooting. With that, we'll jump right into the first piece of this puzzle, and that's really remembering the basics. Here at G3, we like to live with the principles of a watershed-wise approach to landscaping. And in order to do this, we want to treat every property as a mini watershed, so that all the water that falls onto this property, we want to hold on to that water and keep it on our property. We want to shift the paradigm away from this conventional landscape where we've got compacted soils, poor quality plants that don't do well, depleted aquifer. We want to shift to a watershed-wise landscape, which is really just about mimicking nature. This is how we have happy, healthy landscapes that are going to thrive no matter where we live. The beauty of this is we can convert any landscape from conventional to watershed-wise by following the 4 principles. The first is growing a healthy living soil sponge. The second is we want to passively capture rainwater and use it as a resource. The third is we want to select plants that are climate appropriate. Well, most of these are going to be native to your area. The fourth principle, which is really the focus of this webinar, is that we want to use irrigation as efficiently as possible and only when necessary. One way to do that is through your sprinkler controller. Now, even when you've done all this right, some gardens are going to need additional water. So depending on when you plant it, there's a very important establishment period that you need to follow as these plants continue to mature, as they continue to root deeper and root wider. Even dryland natives are going to need some supplemental watering, especially in that garden setting. And the biggest impact here is with climate change. It's making our rainy seasons highly variable, and there are going to be times in the future where you need to irrigate when maybe you didn't before. Now, where do we need that water? Well, we need it in the green water zone. And this term is the water that sits in the soil where roots exist. This is where that sponge is so-called. This is where we need the water, right? So that our plants can use it, all those wonderful microorganisms in the soil can use that water as well. Now, once water's in that green zone, it's removed through the process of what we call evapotranspiration, or ET. Now, ET is basically 2 words smushed together. The first is evaporation. Think of this as the sun comes out, a puddle evaporates. Well, the same thing over the surface of the soil. As that sun comes up, water from that soil evaporates up into the sky. The second part of this term is transpiration, and that's new to a lot of us, and that transpiration is water lost through plant leaves. So if you look at this diagram of a tree and we see those roots down below, that water in the soil is being taken up by those roots. It's traveling up and down throughout that plant, performing all the wonderful functions it does, but it leaves through the bottom of those leaves of a plant called the stomata. So as that water leaves, that's what we call transpiration. And so the combination of those words, evaporation and transpiration, is where we get the term ET from. And what this is a fancy word that basically tells us how much water does a plant need to be happy and healthy. And we typically express that in terms of inches per year. Right? So this is how water leaves the soil through evapotranspiration. It is irrigation's role now to replace that water that's been lost, right? That's our goal here, as you can see here with the drip irrigation tube. Now, the goal of this irrigation is to maintain a balance of oxygen and water in the soil. And that's really important. A lot of times we think we need to water, water, water. Well, too much water is a bad thing because you have no oxygen. That you can actually kill a lot of our native plants just as easily by overwatering as you can underwatering them. You also don't want, of course, things to be too dry. Too dry, then our plants do die. All those beneficial microorganisms go dormant or can die as well. So we want to be right in the middle, kind of just right, where we have a balance of oxygen, a balance of water in our soils. Now, this soil has different textures. And we think of texture kind of as particle sizes. So the image on the bottom left here, we think of sand being really big and clay being really small. Well, in reality, they're all pretty small, but clay soils are smaller particles. Sandy soils are bigger particles. And depending on the texture of your soil, this is going to impact a lot of aspects, but specifically here, it's going to impact the plant's ability to extract that water from the soil. So we like to use coffee analogies here at G3. So if you take a look at this at the iced coffee on the left there, this represents our sandy soil. So if we think about the coffee as we're pouring it into this glass, it pours in very quickly. If I take a straw and I try to drink that iced coffee, I can drink it very quickly, right? It comes right out. I might get a brain freeze, but it comes right out. Well, that represents a sandy soil, right? Where water can enter sandy soils very quickly, but it also leaves very quickly. It can be removed quickly. On the right-hand side here, we have a blended coffee, and this represents our clay soil. If after we blend that coffee up and we go to pour it in the glass, well, it doesn't always pour easily. Sometimes we got to bang on that pitcher to get it to come out. If I take that same straw, I put it in my blended coffee and try to drink it as quickly as I can, it's going to come out a lot slower than the iced coffee did. Right? This is our clay soil. It accepts water much slower, but it holds on to that water harder and it holds on for longer. So depending on which texture soil you have, it can impact how water gets in, how water moves through the soil, and how much water is available for your plants to extract that. Now, the age-old question that we get when it comes to irrigation is, well, when do I water, right? Do I need to water when it's just barely past full? Do I water when it's on empty? And the answer to that really just depends on the types of plants you have and how quickly those plants evapotranspire, right? Our grasses, for example, a lot of them, like our cool season grasses, well, they sweat very quickly, right? They evapotranspire a lot. We have to water a lot more frequently. Versus our native plants are more adapted to the conditions at which we live in, and so they sweat a lot slower. Right? So the rate at which water is being removed is heavily dependent on the type of plants you have, which is going to impact how frequently, of course, you have to water. Now, the goal, though, of our sprinkler controller is to create a schedule that matches our plant water needs. Right? So if you look at this graph here and you look at the line in blue that goes across, looks like a nice little bell curve. That line represents the actual landscape water need, where we see we start in January, water need continues to go up and up and up and up, peaking in sort of July time period there and continues to go down, right? As temperatures cool off, as we start to get more rains, the water need for water decreases. Well, those light blue bars across, that really represents the actual amount of irrigation applied to typical landscapes, where we create this summer schedule. We water the same schedule from May all the way through October, and then we ratchet it down for winter and we run that schedule again until summer comes. Well, all the blue space above that blue line represents water that's not needed, water that's wasted, water that we might not have. So that's the purpose of our sprinkler controller, is to match that irrigation, match that ET curve of what the plants actually need. So how do we do this? Well, let's talk about determining an irrigation schedule. Now, doing this is not throwing darts at a dartboard, especially with your eyes closed, right? There's an actual detailed science behind it. So what we need to do is we need to get into our landscape and we need to look at our site conditions. The first thing we want to figure out is, what type of soil do you have? Do you have a very coarse textured soil, like a sandy soil, or is it a very fine clay textured soil? The only way to figure this out is to conduct a soil test. There are a variety of ways to do it. In the supplemental resources we're going to provide you with this webinar, you can look up what we call texture by feel, otherwise the soil hand test, where you kind of knead soil through your fingers. There's also the soil jar test, which is a bit more scientific. You take some soil, you put it in a jar, add some water, you shake it up, and you let it settle. Heavy particles settle quickly, so on and so forth. And you kind of measure how it settles to determine your texture. You can even send off a sample of your soil to a lab to get, really detailed testing. Either way, though, you need to figure out what type of soil do you have. Remember, it impacts how water goes in and how water leaves. We also need to know, well, what type of vegetation are we watering, right? Are we watering trees or watering grass? Those water requirements are going to be very different. Are they annuals? Are they perennials? Are they shrubs? We need to know what type of vegetation we have because, again, that impacts how quickly water is removed. You need to know if you're on a slope, right? The steepness of that slope impacts how water can get into that slope, how quickly it can enter. So you're going to need to know, am I on a slight slope, a steep slope, or really it's just a flat area? You also need to look at what's happening with the sun in your landscape. Is it an area that just gets full sun all day? Or is it an area that gets maybe partially shaded from a neighbor's tree in the afternoon? Or maybe it's on the side of the house that gets the reflection off the window that's very, very warm in the afternoon. You need to figure out what's going on with the sun in your landscape. And if you're not sure, the easiest way to do it is just take a stroll in your landscape. Go out there in the morning, the mid afternoon, and then kind of later and kind of see what's happening with the sun, noting the different areas in your landscape. You also need to know what irrigation delivery method you're using. Is it traditional spray sprinklers, the bottom right-hand corner that kind of pop up and just shower water everywhere? Um, those use the highest amount of water, puts a lot of water out very quickly. If you have those, I recommend upgrading to something more efficient like the multi-trajectory rotating nozzles. The water comes out in these sort of fingers that continue to kind of cycle through. The droplets of water are bigger, so more of that water makes its way onto the grass. It can better absorb that water because it's a much slower flow rate than your spray sprinklers. Rotating nozzles or rotors are also very good as well. And some of our most efficient watering comes from drip irrigation. But either way, you need to know, how are you applying that water to your landscape? Then you're going to take all that information and plug it into a watering calculator. Now, I recommend looking for a local watering calculator, something that's developed by your water provider, your city, your conservation district, some kind of municipality that delves in water. See if they've got a local one. If not, you can look for something that's maybe statewide, or there's even one that is used across the United States, the EPA. But try to find a watering calculator. You're going to plug in all that information. It's going to spit out a recommended watering schedule. And then what this watering schedule is going to tell you is it's going to tell you how much water you need to do each month so that you can make those changes, right? Kind of match that curve that we saw earlier, where we're watering more when it's hotter and drier, and we're watering less and when it gets cooler and wetter. So in this particular case here, you can see July is highlighted there, where we're going to be watering 2 days a week. We're going to be doing 5 minutes per cycle and 3 cycles per day. Right. And then at the very bottom there, you'll notice in that blue bar, there's a special space there for seasonal adjustments. We're going to talk about this later, but it's an easy way to just adjust the percentage of how much you're watering compared to that highest month in July. Now, there's a way to figure out your watering schedule without having to use a watering calculator. You can do that with what we call the catch can test. Now, there's going to be a link to a video provided to you on how exactly to do this. But basically, you set out water in cans, you turn on the irrigation system, you're looking at the efficiency of that system, when we call the head-to-head coverage, and you're looking at how much water is evapotranspiring in those areas as well. Then you're going to take that schedule, however you created it, you're going to write it down and keep it with your controller. That's really, really important so that a month from now, 6 months from now, when you're making those adjustments, you don't need to remember what it is. It's right there ready for you. Now, along with this schedule, I also recommend you keep a map of your landscape as well. So you know that valve one, or zone one in this case, waters the front yard, and valve two waters the strip along the driveway, and valve three waters, the grass in the backyard. Right? If you don't have a map, create a map. And if you're not sure, well, I don't know what valve one waters. Well, turn valve one on and take a look at the area it waters and make note of it, right? Even if it's just some hand notes that says like, left side of the driveway, right side of the driveway, planter beds with the roses, or a map like this. But you want to know which zones are watering what. That's really important. Keep it with your controller because 3 years from now, you may not remember. Then right now, I want you all to be thinking about, okay, what type of controller do I have? Do I have a manually programmable controller or do I have a weather-based smart controller? Right? If you're not sure, well, A manual controller, if you bought it probably, 10 years ago and before, it's definitely a manual controller. If it's a controller that you have to go out and manually, make adjustments for any schedule changes, that's a good indicator there. If you've bought a controller in the last 10 years, really specifically in the last 5 years, one that needed Wi-Fi or that has its own little weather station, then you've likely got a weather-based controller, right? This uses weather data and creates a daily schedule for you and makes those changes automatically. Right? So you need to know and identify right now which kind of controller do you have. So we're going to start with the manual controller. We're going to look at programming just one zone. So your controller is going to look different. Right? This is just an example that we've got, but they all function very similarly. So let's look at our sample zone here. We've got warm season grass. We're watering with spray sprinklers. We've got a sandy loam soil, and it sits in an area of full sun. We plugged all that information into our watering calculator, and this is what we got. We've got our highest watering where we're watering 8 minutes per start time. That's the top line. We're doing this 4 times a week for a total of 32 minutes of watering per week. And then you can see that that watering schedule changes throughout the year so that we're adjusting it month by month by month. So let's look at kind of the key components here when it comes to your controller. It's going to have some kind of screen on it, right? A digital display. Now, if your timer does not have a digital display, that means it is very, very old. It's likely it's going to be time for an upgrade. These ones are a lot easier to use than the old school dials when you're trying to program it the way that we want to program it nowadays for efficiency. So you've got some screen. You're going to have some kind of dial that changes the settings, right? Of what aspect we are adjusting. You're going to have some kind of plus and minus buttons, left, right arrows that allows you to add more minutes or take it away or go from left to right. And then you've got some other settings you'll notice here, like you can turn the system off. You can manually run the sprinklers. And there's a seasonal adjustment button that I'll mention in just a couple of slides as well. Now, yours is going to look a little different. So if you're not sure how to work your timer, look at the make and model of it and go look up the manual. Look up some YouTube videos for it. That'll be a good guide to how you control and adjust your sprinkler controller. So in this case, we're going to start by taking that knob. We're going to click it one click to the right, clockwise to the date and time. This is really important. Sounds simple enough, but you just want to make sure your timer has the correct date and time, right? If it's the wrong time, you're going to be irrigating at the wrong times, right? So make sure that you got the correct date and time. You can adjust that with the plus minus arrows as you go up and down, and the right left arrows to go from time to date and to make sure you get all those correctly. Then you're going to go one more click to what we call start times. Now the start time, this is the time of day where your sprinkler controller sends a signal to your valve 1 and says, go ahead and open valve 1, and valve 1 waters that area. That's very important. If we don't set smart times, your sprinklers are not going to turn on. Right? Now, when it comes to what time do I irrigate, we recommend sometime between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. Really, we want to irrigate when the sun's not out. If you live in an area that's really windy, you don't want to irrigate with spray sprinklers when it's really windy. So we're trying to optimize our irrigation start time based on kind of what the weather like, what's going on at that particular time. And then also make sure you're adhering to any local regulations. There are some areas that stipulate when you can and cannot water. Right? So make sure you're meeting those windows, but typically later at night or early in the morning. After we've adjusted our start time, we're going to go one more click to the right to what we call run times. Now, the run time basically says how long that valve is going to stay open for. So while we said to go ahead and turn on at 8 p.m., well, what time is it going to turn off? So the run time, you typically adjust it up, down, plus minus to the number of minutes. And if you remember the last schedule we did, we said it run for, say, 8 minutes. So this is where you'd adjust that. Click it up till it gets to 8. Then you're going to go one more click to watering days. This is the frequency at which you're irrigating, and you can adjust this to certain days of the week. You can say, I want to water Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You can adjust this to just even or odd days or even fixed intervals. Say, I want to water once every 3 weeks. It's really important, again, with this watering day, you adhere to any local regulations. Depending on where you live, during times of, say, drought, there are certain, agencies that have, odd addresses, only water on these given days. So make sure you're adhering to those local regulations when it comes to the days you're going to be irrigating. Once you've set those watering days, it's essential you click that all the way back up, to run. Okay. If you don't set that dial to run or to auto, your controller is not going to work. And I've been out to countless homes where things aren't going well. Things are starting to die. They can't figure out what's wrong. The sprinkler controller wasn't set back to run. So after you make those adjustments, set it back to run, and then you're done. So hopefully that was pretty easy. Again, if you're having troubles, look at your make and model, look for that manual. You can usually find them online. And a lot of manufacturers nowadays have great how-to videos on YouTube to help you adjust. If you've got a really old controller that doesn't have any of these interfaces, it's probably time for an upgrade. Depending on where you live, there are oftentimes rebates available to help you purchase one of these new controllers to increase your watering efficiency. Now, what if we've got runoff? So in our last example, we were watering the grass for 8 minutes. Well, 8 minutes can be a lot, especially if you're watering with spray sprinklers, because water comes out at each one of those sprinkler heads, comes out about the same rate as a shower head. Right? So that's a lot of water very quickly. What I want you all to do is to conduct a runoff test. So I want you to go to your timer, or you can do it at the valve itself, but I want you to manually run, say, valve 1, wherever your spray sprinklers are. And I want you to start a timer. And I want you to just sit there and watch, because at some point, your soil on the top basically becomes saturated. The water is coming too quick. The grass and the soil can't absorb it quick enough. So that water will tend to run off. So when you're watching for this, as soon as you start to see water kind of run off, it's going to happen at whatever the lowest point of the landscape is. I want you to stop that stopwatch, stop your timer. And you'll notice, okay, whatever time that is. In this case, runoff starts to occur at 4 minutes. Well, 4 minutes becomes your max runtime. So anytime you're watering longer than 4 minutes, you're literally just throwing your money down the drain. So what we want to be able to do is say, okay, 4 minutes is our max runtime, and now we're going to implement what we call a cycle and soak. So in this particular situation, we said we need to water for 8 minutes, but I can only water for 4 minutes at a time. So what we're going to do is we're going to water for 4 minutes. We're going to cycle off for 60 minutes, and then we're going to water for an additional 4 minutes after that. And that hour-long gap in between is going to allow that first layer of water that we applied to better absorb, so that the second layer of water we apply can further absorb and drive that water deeper. So this is what we call the cycle and soak. Now, when it comes to the cycle and soak, there are two main methods. One of them, as I just mentioned, is where I would water for 4 minutes. I wait an hour and water for 4 more minutes. Another method is to water 4 minutes in the morning, 4 minutes at night, so that you've hit that 8 total minutes of runtime throughout the day. Now, my philosophy here with this is the first one. It's water for 4 minutes, wait for an hour, and water for that second 4 minutes. No matter what kind of plants you have, we want to encourage deep root growth. Right? The deeper the roots grow, the more resilient those plants are going to be. The greater access they have to water, to nutrients, the more stability they've got. It's just better all around. So when we irrigate for 4 minutes, wait an hour and irrigate for another 4 minutes, that second layer of water is helping to drive that first layer of water even deeper. Right? So we're going to get a deeper soak. That deeper water is going to encourage deeper root growth. So that's my mentality when it comes to the cycle and soak. It's up to you, but either way, we want to make sure we're hitting that 8 minutes a day when we're watering, at least here in this example. All right, let's continue on with our manual controller and look at programming multiple zones. So what do I mean by multiple zones? Well, if you take a look at your landscape, you're going to have multiple valves, right? So you want to figure out which valves are watering which areas. You want to make sure that those areas you're irrigating are grouped appropriately. You want to do what we call hydrozoning, and that is grouping plants together based on water need and based on irrigation type. So in this example, our valve 1 is our grass. Right? It's a high water user, it gets full sun, and we're watering it with spray sprinklers. Then we've got our valves 2 and 3. These are going to be native plants, so they're low water users. One of them's in the full sun, one of them's in the shade, but they're both being watered on drip irrigation. Then we've got our last zone here, our zone 4. This is our edible garden. They're high water users, but we're just going to hand water them, so we're not worried about them in this example. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at really one area of grass, high water user, spray sprinklers, versus our native plants, low water users on drip. We're going to need to separate these to create those different irrigation schedules so that we can water them appropriately. The way we're doing that is ensuring that our valve 1 is watering a correct area, our valve 2 is watering another correct area. right? If you've got drip and spray on the same valve, you need to separate them, right? If you're watering high water use plants and low water use plants, you're going to need to separate them as well. So make sure that each valve is watering an area of same water need and same irrigation type. And each one of those valves now is going to need to have its own schedule. And the way we're going to do that is where we're going to use programs. Right? Every controller's got typically at least 4 programs, A, B, C, and D. You want to think of each program as a mini controller, right? So that when you program A, it's its own little mini controller. Program B, it's its own little mini controller. So you can irrigate those properly. So in this case, program A is the lawn, and it's our high water user, spray sprinklers in full sun. Program B is going to be our zones 2 and 3. These are our low water plants on drip irrigation. Right. So now we're watering the grass together, we're watering the natives together, and we're going to have happy and healthy plants on both sides. If we try to water them at the same time, someone's going to always end up dead, some in order to get the other one happy. So let's make sure we've separated them properly. So when it comes to running your programs or ensuring this, well, one, we've already ensured the correct date and time. We're going to go to that second click there to look at start times. Right? So the first thing we're going to do is make sure the program button is selected to A. Right? As you click it, it's going to toggle A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. Make sure you're looking at A. Enter your appropriate start time. Then you're going to click the program button, right? We're still on the start time function, the program button till we toggle to B, and then you're going to enter the start time for B. Now, when it comes to this, it's really important that you don't have overlap from one program to the next. So when you program the start time for program A, make sure it has enough time to finish its watering cycle before program B starts. Now we're going to look at this visually here. If I said, okay, program A, I want to water at 4 a.m. and I'm going to do the cycle and soak, right? Because I get runoff after 4 minutes. Well, if I look at this, my program A doesn't end until 5:08 in the morning. But if I set program B to start at 5 a.m., I've got this overlap of a couple minutes. Now, the older timers oftentimes are going to skip that program B, right? Program A is still running when it says program B. It doesn't know what to do. It goes haywire. A lot of times it skips it, or it can actually kind of like restart your timer. If you've got a newer controller, sometimes they'll just roll from one to the next. But to avoid any of that, it's best to just space them out. So instead of program A starting at 4 and program B starting at 5, we're going to start program A at 4. We're going to wait on program B until 5:15. Right? We want to make sure we've got enough time for program A to finish till program B begins to start. So we're going to do 5:15 for program B in this case, where zone 3 is going to roll first and then zone 4 is going to roll after that. Next, we want to set the run times, right? So now we're going to click down to run times, one more click. Toggle the program button, make sure you're on program A, right? This is our spray sprinklers on grass. And we're going to use those plus minus buttons now to adjust the watering minutes, right? In this particular case, this is where we are going to water for 4 minutes, wait an hour, and 4 more minutes, right? Then what you're going to do is click one more click down to watering days and set your frequency there. I say 2 times per week in this example. Then we're going to turn that button back up to run times and we're going to hit the program button. We're going to toggle to now program B. And now we're going to set program B for our run times. In this case, it's drip irrigation. We're running for 45 minutes and 30 minutes for our zone 2 and zone 3. Then we're going to go one more click down to watering days. And in this case, we're watering every 2 weeks, right? Maybe these are a little bit newer plants, not established, or it's during the summertime. We're going to be irrigating them once every 2 weeks. Okay. Now make sure you click that button, toggle button, click, 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 all the way back up to run or to auto, and then you're finished. Woo! Now, if you're not going to be out here adjusting your manual timer every single month, right? Some of you are going to be great about it. Some of you are like, I don't know if I'm going to remember it. Well, the easiest thing you can do to save money and save water on your landscape is going to be to use the seasonal adjustment feature so that you are adjusting it at least every quarter, right? A couple times, especially during those season changes. So if you think about your schedule, you set it to your hottest month, in this case, July. If you look at the way the ET curve goes, right, we start to need less and less water. So an easy adjustment is just say, okay, in September, I'm going to use that seasonal adjustment, click, click, click down to seasonal adjustment. I use the plus and minus buttons to get to 50%. Turn it back up to run, and I'm going to leave it there until the winter time. The rains start to come. Hopefully I turn my system off. I leave it off through the rainy season. Then I turn it back on as things start to warm up in spring. Then as things start to get really warm, the rains go in May in this case, I go back to seasonal adjustment. I go back up to 100% and then I'm done. So I'm adjusting it maybe 4 times per year. This is kind of the bare minimum that you want to do for a manual controller. Keep in mind that this evapotranspiration curve is going to be different depending on where you live, right? Everyone's climate is a little bit different. Here's an example for Montana where we get a lot of our water needs, right, during the summertime, but you can see that curve is much more tight than the last one we looked at. So that we're watering at say 70% of our peak program in spring. We're turning our system off and we're winterizing by late September. So you need to figure out what that evapotranspiration curve, what that water need curve looks like where you live, so you can make those seasonal adjustments accordingly. All right, let's talk about smart controllers. Now, if you went through the manual controller last 2 sections and you're thinking to yourself, this is just a lot, man, I don't know if I can do all this. I'm not going to get out there and adjust it frequently enough. Then I strongly recommend upgrading to what we call a smart irrigation controller. If you've already got one, then it's essential to make sure that you set it up correctly, right? So this is really a good application to both. So why are we talking about smart controllers? Well, they take the guesswork out of when am I supposed to water? How often should I be watering, right? They automatically make those adjustments to water more when it's hot, less when it's cold, and to not water all when it's raining, right? We can program in the cycle and soak. We can even track our water usage. So smart controllers take our site conditions, which we're going to talk about, pair that with weather data to create your irrigation schedule for you, right? And they're going to make those seasonal adjustments based on the weather at that particular date and time. So that's why they're very, very efficient. Now, there are 2 ways of gathering this weather data. One of them is going to be with a local mini weather station. If you get a timer that has its own mini weather station, it is essential that this weather station be as close to the garden as possible, right? You don't want to have it on the opposite side of the house, like under the roof eave. You want it to get weather data that best matches where you're going to be watering, right? Where the plants exist. So you might have your own little mini weather station, or you might have a timer that actually connects to local weather stations or even uses satellites, extrapolates that weather data so it can get an estimate, a really good estimate of what's the weather like wherever you live, right? So regardless of how we're grabbing that weather data, that's how it's able to adjust your schedule every single day, right? That's really going to give you the best when it comes to watering accurately. Now, the wonder of these things is they're programmable from anywhere, right? Technology, good, bad. Well, there's a lot of good that comes when it comes to our sprinkler controllers, right? A lot of them have an app. They're very easy to use. They're very user friendly. Now, when it comes to programming this, though, it's essential that you put in the correct site conditions. Otherwise, the schedule it creates is going to be meaningless, right? It's kind of junk in, junk out. So when it comes to programming this, it needs to know where you live, right? If you got your own weather station, it's going to connect to it locally. Otherwise, most controllers, most commonly nowadays, they need to know where you live, your address, your zip code, something like that, so it can grab your weather data. Then you're going to need to go through and set up each one of your zones. So in this case, it walks you through. You're going to click on zone 1, and then it's going to ask for all those site conditions. So you need to know, okay, what's my vegetation type? Is it cool season grass or is it shrubs, right? Is it annuals? Is it perennials? You need to know what type of sprinklers you've got, right? Again, is it something that sprays? Is it something that rotates? Is it bubbles? Is it drip? So make sure you program the sprinkler type. Again, making sure that each zone only has one type of sprinkler. You do not want to mix types of sprinklers. The third condition here, of course, soil texture. Really, really important. So conduct that texture by field test, the soil jar test, or send out your soil sample to a lab to get formally tested that way. But we need to know those soil conditions. Then we need to know what's going on with sun, right? Does it get lots of sun, right? In this case, it's saying 6 to 8 hours. Is it partial sun, a lot of shade, or is it full shade? Then, of course, we need to know if we're on a slope. This one makes it easy. Is it flat, slight, moderate, or steep? Then we're going to take all these conditions. It's going to automatically create a schedule for you, and then you can manually program any kind of parameters. You can tell it, okay, I don't want to water on Tuesdays and Thursdays, or I only want to water on even days or odd days. And as you put in those features, it's going to automatically adjust the schedule so that it's watering the amount that it needs in any given week or any given day time period. So it gives you a lot of flexibility with this. You can automatically program in your max run times, and therefore it will automatically implement the cycle and soak for you as well. Now, when it comes to resources, whether it is a manual controller or whether it is a smart controller, find the user manual for it, right? Look up YouTube. There's lots of helpful YouTube videos. If you've got a smart controller, usually they have an app that has a lot of great helpful tools to help walk you through it. But look up the various resources for you, for your area, and use those to the best of your ability. Again, if you know you're not going to be out there adjusting your manual timer very often, say once a month, then I would definitely recommend considering switching to a smart controller or a weather-based controller, and check with your local water provider, your city, your municipal district, your conservation district. See if they have any rebates available to help you purchase a smart timer. That's really, really important. Lastly, here we want to cover some maintenance and troubleshooting, right? Unfortunately, no matter what timer you have, you can't just set it and forget it, right? Even the smart controllers, we want to be checking up on them every once in a while, making sure they're functioning properly, right? One of the things to consider is when you have new plantings, there's a very important establishment schedule. You want to follow that very carefully and not what your controller is telling you to do or what that schedule tells you to do, right? Those schedules that create, they assume your plants are already mature, right? And mature plants, use a certain amount of water. But when you first plant a plant, that root ball is very small and that container soil drains very quickly, right? So you're going to have to water more frequently. You're going to have to water more often. It also depends on the time of the year, right? The best time to plant is late winter late fall and early winter, depending on where you live, of course. But where we are here recording this on the West Coast, that's when you want to plant, right? When temperatures cool, when we start to get those rains. That's going to be very different, of course, if you live in an area where you have snow on the ground all winter time, right? And we're going to wait till that snow thaws out, and then we're going to start our planting season into our growing season. So make sure you're following that establishment period. I would really refer to wherever you're buying the plants, the nursery, hopefully, where you're getting those from, and the resources they provide for that. If you're not sure, what's going on, do I need water? Is it not? Is it working? Get out there and use your digital technology, right? See if your soil needs water. One of the things you can invest in is a soil probe where you stab this down in the ground, you pull it out, it pulls out a nice soil profile. This is very helpful because you can see, okay, if I water for 4 minutes on my grass, you stab this in, you pull it out, and you can see, okay, how deep did that water go? Right? Did it go all the way down to where the bottom of the roots are? Or is it going way past the roots? Or is it too shallow? Right? This will help you adjust and say, okay, 5 minutes of watering actually adjusts, gets water through the whole root profile. You don't want to be overwatering. You don't want to be underwatering. Right? This tool also allows you to take a look at it and go, okay, do I have a layer of compaction sitting on the top? How deep are my roots growing? Right? How far does that nice, dark, rich organic soil go? Do I need to mitigate? Another thing you can invest in, a great tool, is a soil moisture probe, or in this case, a soil moisture sensor. Wherever you stick that little gray tip down into the soil, it's going to tell you if that area is wet or dry. Right? It takes the guesswork out. So when you're looking at your plants going, should I water or should I not? Well, you stab this down into the area where the roots are, and it's going to tell you, do I need to water or not? Now, these work wonderfully in a garden setting, on grass, shrubs, plants. They also work great in pots, in vegetable gardens, raised planter beds. So you can really know, okay, do I need to water? And you're not just kind of guessing, right? Keeping in mind that the frequency you're watering is going to change throughout the year. The more sunlight, the more often we have to water. You also want to look for other issues, right, that are occurring, okay? This is how you can kind of figure, okay, is my watering schedule off, right? Do I have dead plants? Do I have puddles in areas? Like what's going on? Something just isn't right. Well, you want to look for these issues with your timer, right? Make sure the manual override key hasn't been activated, right? If that's the case, turn your timer off for 2 minutes, wait, and then turn it back on, set it back to run, right? You want to take a look at your schedules, right? I've been to houses, several houses, where their whole landscape was just flooded. Their water bill went through the roof. They didn't know what was going on. Well, they had multiple schedules. They had a program. I had like A, C, and D were all running when they thought it was only A, right? So make sure you don't have any unwanted schedules. Delete any of those incorrect settings. Make sure that your timer also didn't go back to factory default, right? If that's the case, you need to reprogram it. Now, when would we see that factory default? Well, this is oftentimes after power outages. So if you have a power outage or some kind of power surge, really any kind of electrical disruption, a lot of times it goes back to manufacturer default, which is typically 10 minutes every day. So if that's the case, then you want to make sure you reprogram it correctly, right? You may need to go in manually and do the whole thing again. Make sure you're adjusting for daylight savings times, right? As the time changes, go out that one click, adjust the time, click it back, make sure you adjust any other settings as necessary. Of course, if you got a smart controller, it should do this for you, right? But you still want to check. Right? Go into the app, make sure things are looking the way they should be looking. What I like to do also and encourage my customers to do is look at your water bill too, right? Make sure your water bill isn't jumping crazy high or going down crazy low when it shouldn't be, right? Any big changes to the water bill are often a result of what's happening in the landscape. That's our biggest water use typically. If you go out to your timer, right, something's going on and you see a blank display, right, this is also typically due to an electrical disruption. Hit the reset button, right? Sometimes it's on the bottom. Sometimes you need to pop the face off and there's a reset button on the inside. You want to cycle power too. So unplug the controller. If you have a battery backup, take that battery backup out, give it a couple minutes, then put the battery back in, power things back up, and then take a look at your schedule. Make sure it is where it needs to be or where it should be. Adjust it, of course, accordingly. If you've just got an inactive controller, right? You go out there, it's the display still working. Well, make sure it's set to run or to auto, right? Make sure you have a start time, right? If you don't plug a start time, even if you've got a run time and you got a day, it's still never going to turn on. So make sure you've got that start time and then confirm the rest of your settings. Make sure the day, time, watering days, all of that. Make sure that the settings are the way that they should be and that you've clicked it back up to run or to auto. If you've got a connection area, specifically this is for smart controllers that rely on Wi-Fi, right? If you've got Wi-Fi issues at the router, it's going to impact your controller, right? Just like it may impact your camera or your computer or anything like that. When you're setting up your smart controller, it's going to do a test for your Wi-Fi signal. Make sure you have strong enough Wi-Fi signal in the beginning, right? If your Wi-Fi signal is too low where the timer is, then I recommend getting a Wi-Fi booster. Right? They're very inexpensive. You can get them for like 20 bucks. You want to plug that booster somewhere in between the router and wherever you need Wi-Fi. In this case, say the timer's in your garage. So what that booster does is it grabs the signal from your router and then sends it further. In my own house, I have one of those for the security camera in the front, right? The booster, it's made a big difference in those areas. So make sure you've got a strong enough Wi-Fi signal when you're setting up your smart timer. And then as you're using that smart timer, if you have any Wi-Fi issues, you need to treat it just like you would any other device. So you can power that device on and off, try to reconnect it to the Wi-Fi, go to your Wi-Fi router. Sometimes we need to power that on and off. Sometimes it's an internet connection from our provider, right? So any of those same Wi-Fi issues you have for a computer or another device can happen with your sprinkler controller. With that, I want to thank you all for watching this webinar on programming your irrigation timer. I encourage you, if you're out there and you decide, okay, it's time to upgrade our timer, make sure you're looking for a device that has the WaterSense label. What this means is it means that it meets specific EPA criteria that guarantees water savings over conventional devices. A lot of times, if you're buying a smart controller that has a rebate associated with it, they require you to look for this WaterSense label. So this is something through the EPA. It's nationally recognized, not just on controllers, but really on any kind of water type devices. It's always a great symbol to look for to make sure you are ensuring success. Now that you've finished this webinar, make sure you go look at the supplemental documents that are being provided. Get out into your landscape, conduct an irrigation audit, test your soil texture, look at your sprinkler type, your types of plants, what's going on with the sun, and plug that in, program, you create a schedule for your garden or program it into your smart controller, and hopefully have a successful, happy landscape. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at another webinar.